My name is Michela and I've been type 1 diabetic since 2017 now. 3 years ago I started running and I just ran my third marathon, the Frankfurt Marathon, closing with a finishing time of 3 hours and 50 minutes. I'm not a professional, but this is how I do it. I know that some other type 1 diabetics do something completely different than me, but this is my experience, this is how I do it, this is how I train and what I use during the training. So first of all, I use an insulin pump, the T-Slim X2 with a Dexcom G6. And I use an older version of the pump with an algorithm called Basal-IQ. Now, if you started using the T-Slim recently, you probably never heard of it. But this is an older version of the current algorithm that corrects only when you are going low. So basically what it does is just stops the basal when it predicts you are going too low. I also tried Control-IQ, which is the newest version of this algorithm some time ago, but it didn't really work for me because it was constantly correcting me. Even though most of the time, especially if I'm going out for a run, I don't need any correction. I need to have a lower basal, I need to have as low insulin on board as possible, and this was often not the case with Control-IQ. I tried many things that people usually suggest online, but I just found out that I really need a very small amount of insulin during my runs, and for me it just doesn't work if the pump gives me corrections, even if they are the smallest correction ever. So this is why I'm sticking with Basal-IQ and unfortunately also with Dexcom G6. But this combo is working pretty fine for me. So this is pretty much the setup. I never ran without diabetes. So as I said, I was diagnosed in 2017. And I started running more or less 3 years ago. So I don't really know how it is to train for a marathon without type 1 diabetes. And my whole experience with running is just with diabetes. So first thing first, when I start training for a marathon, usually it's 2 months before the race, I know that I will change many times the setting on my insulin pump. Usually for me, in the first couple of weeks, I need to readjust both the basal insulin and also the amount of insulin that I take during meals. And I know that in the first couple of weeks, I usually need less insulin, just because my body is adjusting to a higher volume of training. What I usually experience is that after 3-4 weeks maybe, I don't need to adjust my insulin anymore because I reached that point of balance where my body is just used to the training. And in that case, I won't change the overall settings of the insulin pump, and I will work basically only with the temporary basal that you have in Basal-IQ. I just adjust the insulin that I need every day depending on the case. And I think this is also the most difficult thing, the constant need to adjust everything. Especially if you're a woman, your insulin needs may vary not only based on the training that you are doing, but also based on your period, for example. I would say during the first part of the training block, I focus on preventing going too low too often. And then on the second part, after this first 3 weeks, I adjust the insulin needs based on what is going on with my body, how many carbohydrates I'm eating, and on the other factors that may impact my blood sugars, basically. When it comes to eating, of course, during the training, I usually eat a little bit more than usual. First of all, because I'm hungry. Of course, if you make more effort, you will need more energy, and more energy means that you need to eat a little bit more. And I also eat tons of carbs. I know that this is not the case for many type 1 diabetics, but this is what works for me. Also because I'm Italian, so of course I need to make it work. And what I do, especially if I'm eating complex carbs like pasta or bread, I usually split the bolus in two. So I do the first 60% right away, maybe 15 minutes before my meal, and then the rest in the 2 hours. On this insulin pump, this is called extended bolus, but I know many other insulin pumps have the same. Now, let's talk a little bit about the different runs that I have during a week. Usually I go for a run in the morning before breakfast. If, for example, I'm having an easy run, or also if I'm having an interval run. I found out that this is the best way for me because if I have insulin on board, oftentimes I just go too low and I just have to stop every 2 meters. So every day for me is before breakfast, and then I arrive home, I shower, and I have a breakfast right away. And as I said before, I adjust my basal in a way that it's a little bit lower before this early morning run slot. I won't spike, but at the same time, I won't go too low during the run. And the same goes for interval trainings. Now, what I do is that every day I decide how to proceed as soon as I wake up. If I see that my blood sugar is, I don't know, around 120, 130, for me, it's perfectly safe to go for a run of 1 hour without having breakfast. If I see that, for example, is on the lower side, maybe around 80 milligram per deciliters, in that case, I drink a glass of juice before going out, especially if I'm, for example, doing interval training. In that case, I know that I need a little bit of sugar so I won't end up low or too low later. It's a different story during the long runs. I'm not that fast, so I need to stay out there for 2 or 3 hours, and it's impossible to do it without the energy of a breakfast. Usually I do my long runs on Saturday, so I wake up early in the morning, maybe around 6. I bolus for the right amount of insulin that I usually take for a breakfast, and then I go back to bed and I wake up 2 hours later. In that case, my blood sugar may be a little bit on the higher side, maybe 160, but I will be able to go for a run without going low. Before doing long runs, I also set up my temporary basal at between 50 or 70% of the usual basal rate. So in this way, I know that I will arrive at taking the first gel with the correct blood sugar and I won't end up low before. Now, regarding the gels, I usually use these. I know that some people use something different. Some people just have candies or dates or whatever. For me, this is just more convenient because I know exactly that it's consistent. It's always the same amount of carb, and it's just easier for me during a long run, not having to think about how many candies I will eat and so on. Depending on the long run, I will take maybe 2 or 3 of these, and it's a different story during the race. I will tell you a little bit about later. For me, what I found out is that having a lower basal rate, for example, 50%, and having one of these with a little bit of insulin, in my case is a very, very low amount of insulin for 23 grams of carbs. I usually dose for 0.2 units of insulin. It's probably very, very different for you. So it takes a little bit of trial and error when you start doing this to understand exactly how it works for you and for your body. Let's talk a little bit about the race itself and the days directly before the race. I carb load starting 3 days before the race. What I do is, first of all, I usually try to stick to healthier carbs, something that I know how to calculate or estimate correctly. So the day before the race, if I'm having a high carb dinner, I'm eating maybe 1 hour before the usual dinner time for me. So I know that before going to bed, I will see if I'm spiking too much and I can correct with some more insulin in that case. The same goes for the breakfast before the race. I won't eat and bolus fully for something 1 hour before the race. I will do it maybe 3 hours before the race. So I will wake up, I will have breakfast, and then if I have time, I will go back to bed. And in this way, I can either correct a little bit or decide to leave the blood sugars a little bit on the higher side, depending on how much time I have before the start of the race. On the day of the marathon, I usually carry with me all the gels that I need plus one. Again, because I want to stay on the safe side and you never know how your blood sugars react. And I also bring a box of juice with me to the starting line. I just prefer to have something with me so I can adjust at the last minute my blood sugars. For example, during the last Frankfurt marathon, I noticed that my blood sugars on the previous days had the tendency to go low and also go low fast. So I decided to carry the box of juice with me, and it was the right call because as soon as I reached the starting line, my blood sugar was slightly dropping. During the race, I used the same gels that I trained with, so in my case, these ones, and I take one gel every 7 kilometers. And I also bolus for it. Also, this is very subjective. I know some people don't need extra insulin. In my case, I do a very, very tiny amount of insulin. What it looks like for me is 0.2 units of insulin for 23 grams of carbs. I would say the Frankfurt Marathon went really well for me, not only because it was my first sub-4 marathon, but also because I handled it really well. I stayed consistent with my pace, and at the same time I was very comfortable with the blood sugars I was running it. It was a little bit colder than expected, but overall I'm really happy about how it went. I think this was my first time properly racing a marathon. This was my third one. When I did Berlin and Barcelona, I think I was just taking measurements or learning how to do this. I remember, especially in Berlin, I had no idea how much I could trust myself without going into a danger zone of being too low or too high. And I would say running with type 1 diabetes at the end is an exercise of patience. I think the most important thing is that you understand that this is highly subjective and you have to constantly monitor yourself and adjust accordingly. The most difficult thing, but also the most important one, is that you have to learn how your body reacts to huge efforts and also an effort that it's prolonged in times, right? And I think it's especially important to train and test yourself during long runs, because it's in that case that you try what you are eating, what your body needs in terms of energy and sugars, and how this reflects in your decisions, in the basal rate, in the amounts of insulin that you are taking during your meals. So I hope this video was somehow useful for you. Again, please take this as an advice and know that most likely you will do something different than me if you start training for a marathon. Here is the medal from Frankfurt, and yeah, see you the next time.